Can you get the recording? Yeah. All right. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Friday training. Today's topic is on leases. Most of the agents are reluctant to do leases for some, I don't know, known reasons. Maybe they think that the commission is not good enough. But leases are nothing to be sneer about because it can be a good income for you. Imagine that you have a big commercial lease, especially $2,000 a month. I mean that $20,000 a month, and then you have a 5 years lease. Is easily over $1 million for the whole contract term, and then you have usually it's 5% commission for leases, and you will get if you double enter the leases that lease, it will give you like $40,000 dollars commission. That's not bad at all, and usually probably spend 10 hours for it doing the leases. And it's very, very good income. So I would really encourage you as agents to consider the leases if you're not already doing it. Commercial leases can be lucrative. So we have Michelle today, and Michelle is very knowledgeable in leases, and she can give us a good insight on how to do and how to negotiate for residential as well as commercial leases. So without further ado, Michelle, take it away.
Thank you very much, Peter. And that's right. If you think of leasing both in the residential realm and the commercial, he segued into something that I was going to bring up. Today we'll be going over residential leasing, but we are going to pull in the commercial leasing because there is, as Peter mentioned, there's good money in them. And it's a great way to meet landlords, to show them how you work, how efficient you are. So it's just a good thing if you can get into some leasing. You're going to be meeting property owners, and it's good for us to be out meeting people. So when you're presenting your packages, so we want to show how much we're going to take care of the packages. So this is what, and there's a couple of typos on this. I'm sorry I was doing this late, but we'll fix that before we distribute it. But what we do is, a lot of this information that I'm going to show you is already in the application, but it's a good idea to bring it forward, because when you email this to people along with that application, they understand you're a professional leasing agent. I recommend that you take this and also show it to your client of what you will be collecting for the lease application, and if they have any input. So for residential rental, we request a copy of the driver's license or any other government issued ID. So that should be included. Copy of the last 3 months of pay stubs if the applicant is an employee, or the last 2 years of tax returns if the applicant is self-employed. We also like to see proof of funds, copy of last 2 months of bank statements. Of course, they should be blacking out the account number, leaving their name on there to make sure that that is their bank statement for proof of funds. Now, there's a non-refundable screening fee, which is used to run the credit. On the application, and I'll show you in a moment, you make it payable to who's ever going to be running your credit reports for the landlord, or maybe the landlord has their own source. But on the application, it says not more than $30. So I've left these blank, but I want to point that out to you, and I'll show you below this one. So all proposed occupants 18 and above need to be completing their own package. And I know sometimes parents were renting for our children in college and they don't really have any credit, but landlords understand that as long as there's somebody in there with them with a package. But 18 and above, they need to complete everything. So here, applicant understands and agrees that it's an application to lease a residential property only and it does not guarantee that the applicant will be offered the premises, and landlord or manager or real estate agent will accept more than one application for the premises, and the landlord, it's their sole discretion to select the best qualified candidate. The applicant represents that the information provided on the attached form is true and complete, and authorizes landlord, manager, or agent to verify the information provided and obtain a credit report. So just right here, they need to sign the application, but we always have them sign this too. Most agencies will not, well, all agencies will not run a credit report unless they've signed for authorization for you to do that. So bear that in mind. That's very important that they sign the application. So if they do not fully complete the application and do not provide the screening fee, the application cannot be processed. And if they do not want to provide a screening fee and complete it in its entirety with all the backup documentation, the application will be returned to the applicant. And if you had gotten a check or something for a screening fee, then that will be returned as well. So lease conditions, this is going to change based on your landlord, your unit. So we usually put lease conditions because you'll have people say, hey, can I just rent for 6 months? Well, maybe the landlord wants a 1-year lease, but whatever the lease conditions are for that particular unit, we just put a couple of items just so they know, hey, they're looking for a 1-year lease or whatever the case may be. And security deposit is equal to 2 months rent. This in this synopsis, it's an unfurnished unit, and 2 months is the maximum all in, including key deposits, remote deposits. If it is a furnished unit, you can collect up to 3 months, the equivalent of 3 months rent for a security deposit. Have them sign and date this. Now, as I said, a lot of this information is already on the application, but this, I think, bringing it up front and typing it nicely on top of the application calls their attention to it, lets your landlord know that you're a serious leasing agent and you're going to take care to collect everything for them. So this is the car. Most of us have seen this, the application to rent. So here's the application is completing as a tenant with co-tenant. Even if they check a tenant with a co-tenant, make sure that you have 2 application packages, not just 1 application. We want the application of each person 18 and above. And scan this over for your landlord. Make sure that they have inserted in each box or put NA, and that they have checked these boxes. Make sure this is completely filled out. Applicant's initials go at the bottom. Very important here, their employment and income history, things of that nature. Personal references are good to make sure that you collect, and the nearest relative. And then a lot of this language is pulled forward on that sheet, but we want, the reason that Shumay and I did that is we want them to know we're serious leasing agents. This is what it's going to be required, and they see it right up front, because you'll see back here, there's the screening fee. This is to be completed by the landlord. So the applicant will provide the screening fee information directly to landlord, manager, agents, authorized service at. Usually we're collecting it. We will let them know where we'll be running the credit. And then right here or here, this is the one we usually check. Click this box, applicant shall pay a non-refundable screening fee of, and it says you cannot exceed 30. So 30 directly to landlord, manager, agent, and it applies as follows, okay? So it would be, then you would come down here, $30 for credit reports prepared by, and insert the name if you have it. If not, you can insert it later. The applicant, by signing down here, the undersigned has read the foregoing section regarding the screening fee and acknowledges receipt of a completed copy. Landlord, manager, or agent, they're going to acknowledge receipt of this entire application. So you can sign it, but normally I would have the landlord sign it, but that's between you and the landlord. So whichever way the landlord wants to go. And again, make sure you're showing him that him or her that top list, so that if they have anything to add to it, they can be adding that. So this form, this CAR form, BIRN, is directly attached to the application. You fill in the landlord's name here, and this is that the landlord intends to obtain information about you from an investigative consumer reporting agency or a consumer credit reporting agency. When you know the name and address of it, you can insert that here and make sure that you are providing this form. What this form is telling the applicant is that they can request to see the information from the reporting entity. So make sure that you have this form on file and have them sign it. It is attached to the application, so it's fairly simple to get that done. Applicant or applicants will sign here and date it. So I just pulled up a little bit about the California Civil Code that the BIRN form is talking about. So California Civil Code section 1786-10 requires an investigative consumer reporting agency to allow a consumer to visually inspect all files maintained regarding that consumer at time of request, not to us, to the agency that provided. So under California Civil Code, which is referenced in the above document, 1786-22, an investigative consumer reporting agency shall supply files and information about you, the consumer, during normal business hours. So I just wanted to pull this up to show you this is means that the consumer can ask the reporting entity about the file and what they have in there. So that doesn't pertain to us providing it to them. They can go directly to that entity. So I just wanted to pull that up to give you a little more information about it. So at Coldwell Banker George Realty, regarding leasing for both commercial and residential, we have a property management advisory. You want to put the address in. Property management is really specialized and performed by property managers. So Coldwell Banker George Realty and its agents, we do not engage or participate in any form of property management. We are the leasing agent, we're not the property manager. So we've written some things here. This includes, but is not limited to, collection of rents on behalf of the owner, or taking a rental check and making a deposit on behalf of the owner, serving notices to tenants, turning on and off utilities. A lot of times tenants, when you first lease to them, they get confused and they begin calling you for repairs. Since you were the leasing agent, I always say I'll relay the information to the landlord and have them call you. I'm the leasing agent, the landlord, or whoever the property management company is managing those items. So make sure that you understand this. Don't perform any property management duties. We need to be careful with that. So just taking calls and arranging for labor is part of property management. So just be aware of that. And right here, Coldwell Banker George Realty may serve as the leasing agent for the property owners and is covered under company E&O, errors and omission policy for this specific service. So we're covered to be the leasing agent. We're not covered under our E&O policy to be the property manager. So the choice of tenant and terms of the lease are at the sole discretion of landlord. CBGR cannot and does not warrant the tenant's performance under the lease. So make sure that when you take a lease listing, that you're having the landlord sign and date this, agent signs and dates it, it goes into our file, give the landlord a copy of it. So today, because I don't want to rush through the lease agreement and all of the disclosures, we're going to go through the first, I believe it's 4 or 5 pages of this, and then next week we'll finish up the remaining pages and we'll go through all of the disclosures. So normally when you are a lease listing agent, you're going to be the one completing the month-to-month rental agreement when you have an applicant that the landlord is accepting. However, even if you are representing the tenant and you know the other agent is going to be preparing this, it's still extremely important for you to understand the document, read it, go over it and make sure that you're understanding what's in here yourself. As agents, we should, always understand our contracts to the best of our ability. If you don't understand something, we're always here to answer those questions for you. So let's get to it and see how we can make some additional money. Okay. And like I said at the beginning, we will be going over commercial lease agreements. Today's just residential, and next week we'll finish it up, but then we'll pull in for commercial, not AIR, but car form. Okay. So here you just put in the date you're preparing, the landlord, tenant, landlord rents to tenant. This is where the address goes for the premises. And the premises are for the sole use as personal residence by the following named people only. Make sure you're filling in who's ever living there. For me, if they have a minor child, I usually put and one minor child or two minor children, whatever the case may be. But you want to make sure that you don't leave this blank or it's not left blank, because you want to specify who this residence is for. The following personal property maintained pursuant to paragraph 11, and we'll get to that, is included. You're probably going to have a stove at least, and there could be a refrigerator, or if checked personal property on the attached addendum is included. Maybe if you're renting this furnished, you have a lot of furniture, so you definitely want to attach something to outline that. Also, if you are renting furnished, or even when it's vacant, I recommend that you take pictures while it's vacant or as you're delivering it of the unit. Just take them on your cell phone quickly. If you're working for the landlord, you can provide them. If you're working for the tenant, you can just keep those on file, but I would take pictures as well, just for my own self. So the premises may be subject to local rent control ordinance. If you know for a fact, you fill that in. If not, I just leave this blank unless I know. Maybe I'm in LA and I know. Okay. So remember, you're filling this out on behalf of the landlord. The landlord does need to review your work. Okay. So the term begins on, you put the date here, the commencement date. So here is something that we should not have happened. If the tenant has not paid all amounts due, there are certain payments due prior to moving in, then the tenant has no right to possession. This agreement may be voidable at the option of landlord 2 days after giving tenant a notice to pay, and that's car form PPN. I'm going to scroll down to that because let me show you this. This should not happen. Let me see. So here's the landlord pre-possession. So meaning before they move in, notice to pay. So if they haven't paid the security deposit or rent, you're going to outline it here. All of this will be filled in and the landlord will sign it. You'll deliver it to the tenant at their specified, maybe their email on the application or whatever they've specified. But this should not happen, because when you are meeting with the tenant, you should be already queuing them up that they need to bring, I recommend a cashier's check made payable to the landlord, which will cover the first month's rent and the security deposit. So we shouldn't have to deal with this form. So just bear in mind to always be letting the tenant know, hey, these are the costs that are going to be required upon signing, and the cashier's check is made out to the landlord. Okay, so we hopefully never run into that, but I did want to point that out to you since they're referencing it in the contract. So you're going to check A or B. Maybe it's a month-to-month agreement, or it's a year's lease or 2 years. So month-to-month, this agreement continues from the commencement date as a month-to-month tenancy. And the tenant may terminate this tenancy by giving written notice of at least 30 days prior to the intended termination date. And the tenant is responsible to pay rent through that termination date, even if they decide to vacate early. And landlord may terminate the tenancy by giving written notice as provided by law. Generally, if a tenant has been in a unit less than a year, it's 30 days. If it's over a year, the landlord is normally giving a 60-day notice. So here is normally what we're doing is a lease for a year or more. So you want to terminate it on the termination date. And I usually put in here about 6 p.m. because you want to give them the day to, you know, wrap up the final items and remove themselves from the unit. Tenant shall vacate the premises upon termination of the agreement unless the landlord and the tenant have extended this agreement in writing. So say you want to stay another year, contact the tenant, not you, the landlord. The tenant will contact the landlord. They may do an addendum to the lease. They may do a whole new lease, but they would need to be contacting the landlord to let them know. Okay, so rent means monetary obligations of tenant to landlord under the terms of the agreement. So the tenant agrees to pay. Here's the monthly rent. You insert that here. Rent is payable in advance on the first day of each calendar month and is delinquent on the next day. So you can, if the landlord wants, not you, but if the landlord says, hey, I'll give them 3 days, if they want to amend that, that's their idea. You type it as they wish for the landlord. Now, if the commencement date falls on any other day than the first, like when the rent is due under 3B, and the tenant has paid 1 full month, because when you rent to someone, you always want 1 full month in advance of the commencement date. So you always want 1 full month. But let's say they moved in on the 10th of the month and they paid 1 full month. So that would take them through the 10th of the next month. So on the next month, you want to give them the prorated figure for that month. So it would still be due on the 1st, but the next month it would be the prorated figure, and tenant shall pay 1/30 of the monthly rent per day for each day remaining in the prorated second month. So they've made it really nice. There's no guessing. It's outlined here. When you are performing on leases, whether it is commercial or residential, you always want to make sure that you are getting at least a full month up front of when they come in with that cashier's check. So the payment of rent, and this would be up to the landlord if they are, you know, whatever they're willing to accept, maybe a personal check, money order, cashier's check, made payable to. Make sure you're filling all this in. Do not leave blanks. Or some landlords are requiring a wire or electronic transfer. I've ran into that. Rent shall be delivered to the name. I would just, again, insert the landlord whose phone number is. Make sure you have the landlord's phone number inserted. Maybe they don't have an address for delivery. So if they're doing electronic, they may not provide an address, but if they are not doing electronic, make sure you're putting an address in. And then I'll show you later in the contract that there would be an address for delivery of notices at any rate to the landlord or to the tenant. Or if they have an office, they're telling them here the office's hours and the days that the office would be open if they're dropping it off. So this is important. Make sure it's completely filled in. Now, if a payment is returned for NSF, non-sufficient funds, or because a tenant stops payment, after that, the landlord may in writing require the tenant to pay rent in cash for 3 months, and all future rent shall be paid via whichever one you check, the landlord checks, money order, or cashier's check. Rent payments received by the landlord shall be applied to the earliest amount due or past due. So bear that in mind. If they think they're paying November, but they still owed rent in October, they're going to apply it to the earliest amount past due. Here's the security deposit. Tenant agrees to pay. Most landlords are going to look to collect 2 months for non-furnished or 3 months for furnished. But I've seen some landlords say, hey, I'll just take a month's security deposit. So that is a month equivalent to a month's rent. So that's up to the landlord. You'll need to discuss that with them. Security deposit is always going to be transferred and held by the owner. We never hold anything in our broker's trust fund. Excuse me. So you're always going to be checking this box here that security deposit is transferred to and held by the owner of the premises. all or any portion of the security deposit may be used as reasonably necessary to cure a tenant's default in payment of rent, which will include late charges, NSF fees, or other sums due, repair damage, excluding ordinary wear and tear caused by the tenant or their guests. And if they need to clean premises upon termination of the tenancy. And I've seen this happen, I think once, where somebody took the landlord's refrigerator. So luckily that landlord had enough in the deposit to pay himself back for his newer refrigerator. So they can also use the security deposit to replace their own personal property. So the security deposit shall not be used by the tenant in lieu of payment of last month's rent. Now, if in the course of the tenant being in possession of the unit, that they use some of the security deposit, the landlord can give them a 5-day written notice, and that will mean that the tenant agrees to reinstate the total security deposit upon that written notice, which will be delivered to the tenant. Upon move out, within 21 days after the tenant vacates the premise, the landlord will furnish the tenant with an itemized statement indicating any amount of the security deposit received and the basis for its disposition. Like if they've kept some of the money, they need to let you know what it was kept for, what was deficient. And then after that, they provide you that statement and return any remaining proportion of the security deposit to tenant. Remember that the landlord does have 21 days. And the security, oh, go ahead.
I'll make sure the landlord does it, not the lease agent.
Oh, Brian had, okay, Brian had a good comment about make sure that the landlord is what?
Landlord does the written notice or the.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Police agents don't be doing written notices for the landlord. We're not their property management. Thank you for bringing that up. I know the contract says upon written notice and all that, but when I say that, if I don't say landlord written notice, make sure you understand that any written notice to the tenant, we're not their property manager. As our form states, they need to do their own written management, written notices. Thank you, Brian, for bringing that up, because I don't want any confusion. That would fall into the realm of being a property management company or independent property manager. So please don't make their written notices for them. Let the landlord do it themselves. So the security deposit is not going to be returned until all tenants have vacated the premises and all the keys are returned. And whenever the security deposit is returned, and I've seen squabbles with young people, there's like, oh, it needs to just be in my name. No, the security deposit check will be made to the tenants that are outlined on the lease. They're not going to just make it to one tenant. The full security deposit, if any, will be returned with all names on the check. Okay, so no interest on the security deposit will be paid unless it's required by a local law.
Michelle?
Yes.
Excuse me, I have a question, Jeffrey.
Okay, hi, Jeffrey.
Hi, on the, I understand that the written notice should be, any written notice should be completed, or a statement or notice should be done by the landlord. But the delivery should be, who will deliver?
The landlord, or they hire a delivery or a process service. We don't do any of that, because once you start taping notices on doors or doing any of that, you just stepped into a property management role.
And the landlord should know that, right?
Well, yes, and you're going to provide them with the listing agreement, that form. But any written notices to tenants, you know, don't do that, because now you're a property manager.
Thank you. Got it.
Yeah.
Basically, we don't enforce this.
Yeah, and we're not, yeah, Brian has a good point. We're not the enforcers of this. This is between the landlord and the tenant. We are the leasing agent. Okay,
Correct.
so the landlord must enforce his own contract. It's not up to us to do that.
Clear. Yeah.
Okay.
Loud and clear. Thank you.
Okay, so we're coming down to the fun part of the move-in costs. So the
Michelle,
premises, yes.
excuse me, can I ask you one thing? I'm sorry, I
Oh,
couldn't hit
no
the
problem.
mic.
I welcome questions.
Okay, when you were saying you list all people that are the tenants on the lease. Okay, now, do they even have the children's name on it? You don't put the children's name, just the adults, am I right?
Well, I've seen it both ways. You can put the children's name, but how I've done it in the past is I will put the couple's name or the person's name, and then I will put in one minor child. I don't know if Peter has a more solid idea on that, but I've always outlined it as in one minor child.
Yeah, you're right, Michelle.
Yeah,
You know, if the children's minor, you probably shouldn't mention their name, but
right.
you do have to indicate that you have one minor child. You know, just to clarify that you have more occupants there.
Okay,
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, and
Mhm.
then that way you don't have any check problem, Catherine, and that kind of thing.
Yeah,
oh, okay,
Yeah, and then it's their privacy too.
that's right.
I put the name and age,
Oh,
because if they're turning 18, then they become an adult.
yeah, and
Yeah,
Brian,
yeah, 18 is fine. Over 18 is fine.
Now, if they're like 17, they sign a lease, the kid's a minor at 17, and they stay there for 3 years.
louder.
Louder?
Yeah,
You guys hear me?
so he's saying, what if the minor child is 17 when they move in and they turn 18? I think it provides somewhere in this document, I was reading that you can require an application, but I'll look into that further.
I mean, you want to put the names just in case, because we have a lot of people are subleasing these days. So you want to make sure everybody's on that lease, they're all named. So that way, if they're subleasing a room to somebody, they don't ask you about it, you can always give them a notice to, what is it? To
Yeah,
remedy
that's
the
true.
situation. Or you can tell the landlord, hey, you can charge more because they're subleasing a room or they're adding someone that's not on the original lease.
Yeah,
So that's a way to kind of get around the rent increase. You know, if you're maxed out 10% and you had leased the place, you know, lower and they're subleasing, you can always get them for increased rent because they're subleasing.
okay, that's a good point. Yeah, okay. So let me see if there's any other questions in the chat box. Oh, okay. Yeah, what about a newborn baby after they moved in? Christine's asking. I wouldn't really worry too much about that because they got a long way to go to 18. But I have had people with newborn babies, and as I stated before, I just put and one more minor child. And anyway, they didn't really want, you know, the baby's name out. So we're going to continue on with move-in costs received due. Move-in funds shall be paid
Michelle.
by.
Okay, before you continue, I have a comment on the security deposit. For residential leases, you cannot charge excessive security deposit. In other words, you cannot charge more than 2 months from unfurnished apartments or residents, or 3 months if it is furnished. So that's a limit to the security deposit that you can charge. But for commercial leases, you have no such limitations.
Yeah, and
That's what I
that
wanted
is
to-
that's a California law, correct, on those
Yes,
security deposits?
That's
Okay,
right.
thank you, Peter. And as he said, no limit on commercial, so that's a really good input on that. Here I want you to make sure you're looking at this number 5. Please check this, because when we sign leases with people, I work you know, with other agents, make sure you're checking. I always check cashier's check. When they're coming in, when they're first coming in, the first money in is a cashier's check. Or I suppose you could do money order, but we usually require a cashier's check. The tenant has been well prepared for that. We've let them know, so we put an X here. So the category here of what they're paying is going to be rent from and to. So like I said earlier, if they move in 11/10, it's going to take them to 12/10. You're going to put a full month's rent here, security deposit, unfurnished if the landlord so desires, up to the equivalent of 2 months. If you put other deposits here, take it out of here, minus it out if you want $100 for the remote, $100 for the key, don't exceed the 2 months here. And then it totals down for you. So the balance due and the due date, you always want to make sure that you're collecting this, you know, in my opinion, a couple of days ahead of lease commencement date. You want to make sure you're getting this over to the landlord in time for them to fully execute the agreement. And then, so make that a couple, 2 to 3 days out before this commences. So the payment will be received. If I'm the one collecting the cashier's check, I'll simply write the date in here that it was received, and you're going to fill all this in. It's going to be payable to the landlord. Okay. Now, if you want to wait and have the landlord put the date in, you can do that. When they give you a cashier's check or whatever form of check they're handing you, please make sure that you make a copy of that check and hand it back to them so they feel comfortable. Always, always, always. I always give them a copy back when they hand it to us. Okay. So that
Michelle?
makes everybody,
I'm sorry, question. A lot of
Yeah.
the agents get really confused under the category rent from to. So they're collecting the first and the last rent. How should that read?
No, this is the first. Okay, so good question, Anna. So this is rent. This is the first month. So even if the rent is commencing on 11/10, but the rental payment's going to due on the first the next month, right? But the landlord always wants to come in with a full month's rent up front along with their security deposit. So you can put, if I'm moving in today, I'm going to put 11/4. This is going to carry me through to 12/3. From 11/4 to 12/3 is my first month in. So my total amount due for 1 month's rent is going to be placed here, my security deposit. So going into December, I'm going to be provided by the landlord, and you can prefigure this with the landlord so they know in December they're paying a prorated amount. Okay, so they're going to pay in December. They paid through the 3rd on this agreement, so they're going to pick it up from 12/4 to December 31st. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and so then where you put the last month, because you know sometimes they collect first and last and deposit, where will you put the last month?
So it's just included in here, security deposit.
Oh, it should be
Right
part of
here.
security?
Yeah.
Okay.
So when we talk security deposit, we say, you know, the same as rent. What we really are saying is it's equivalent to, you know, a month's rent. It's equivalent to 2 months rent. So yeah, you don't put last month, you just put security deposit. And remember, up in the first page of the agreement, they cannot use the security deposit as last month's rent. The landlord needs to retain some funds to make sure when they're checking the client out of the unit that everything's good. And then the landlord will return whatever is due the client or the tenant within 21 days.
Because truly, they have to call it deposit because by law, they really can't collect first rent and last rent. They could collect first rent and deposit only.
Security deposit. I don't know if it's by law. We don't collect last month's rent. I have never seen that because we want to retain this security deposit. And what I believe, and Peter can jump in, if we were collecting, let's say another month's rent, that would total too much. And I think we need to stay within what it says here. A security deposit cannot exceed 2 months for unfurnished or 3 months for furnished. We don't want to go over that.
That's
Okay.
right. You know, the last month's rent is actually the security deposit. You really cannot say that you're collecting the last month's rent. Okay?
Yeah.
So
Okay. That's great
automatically the
because-
last month will
Okay.
be treated as a security deposit.
Okay,
But
because
the
yeah, I
total
have a lot
amount-
of agents trying to put, what they do is from say 12/1 and then they go to 11/1 of the following year. And I'm like, no, I don't think that's what goes there. So I just wanted to clarify that. Okay.
Yeah, those
okay.
are good questions. Thank you. Thank you. Because if people are, you know, questioning that, it's good that we're all here together to have Peter's guidance on it.
Michelle, Jeffrey,
Yes,
I just want to put a number on this one, just to clarify on the rent and the deposit. Let's put a number. Let's say that the rent is 2,000. So the security, the rent will be 2,000 and the security deposit times 2 will be 4,000.
as long as it's, yes, if it's not furnished. Unfurnished premises, maximum up to 2 times of the rent. So that would be
So
right.
so the total will be 2 plus 4 will be
Yeah,
6,000.
6,000 in, yeah.
Just to be sure about the number.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Okay, so late charges returned checks. So the tenant acknowledges that a late payment of rent or issuance of a return check may cause the landlord to incur costs, and it does, because it's getting so expensive on the return check fees, and also maybe they have a mortgage payment due. So the exact amounts are extremely difficult and impractical to determine. So California law says that the amount charged for a late fee right here can be reasonable. So what is reasonable? 5 to 10%, and Peter can jump in on this because 5 to 10% is what I'm reading, and the law states that it must be reasonable. So the percentage could be, most landlords from what I'm seeing are charging a 5% to 6% late fee. Peter, do you have any comment on that?
Yeah, that's right. It has to be reasonable, no more than 10%.
Okay, yeah. So that is something that you would be discussing with the landlord. It's nice when you're the lease listing agent, you draft this up anyway and you highlight, you know, these types of items. I would highlight it all anywhere that you have typed in or check marked. I would be putting a highlighter to that to make sure that they are picking that up, that is something that, you know, they can change. Okay. So the landlord and the tenant agree that whatever you put in here, the fee for the late charge is fair and reasonable estimate of costs the landlord may incur by reason of the tenant's late or NSF payment. So parking can be really, you know, depending on where you're at, it can be very tight. It can be, you know, people in people's spots. So make sure you're not leaving this blank. So the right to parking, it is or is not included in the rent. Most of the units around here, I've seen it is included. Maybe when you get down by the beach area, it may not be included. They may not even have room for you to park. So if there is room, you check this box. Parking is permitted as follows. Maybe they get 1 reserved parking spot on the premises. So if that's the case, then you write that. If the parking spot has a number, I would certainly be referencing that number as well, as long as you're not going to renumber it. But parking is permitted as follows: 1 reserved parking spot on the premises, if that's the case. Okay, and then you need to mark if that is included in the rent. Is the landlord charging extra for that parking space? If they are, you need to insert the amount per month. Now, when you're in the beachy areas where there's not a lot of room, you may be checking B, that parking is not permitted on the real property of which the premise is a part of. Maybe there's no parking there. So make sure you're not leaving these blank. Check the appropriate box. Storage, you check A or B. Storage is permitted as follows. Some of them I've seen, there's even like a storage cabinet above the parking spot. So if there's something like that, you could put storage cabinet above 1 reserved parking space, whatever the case may be. And the right to separate storage is or is not included in the rent. If it's not included and they're charging an additional fee, you need to insert that. Now, what I'm normally checking is B right here, except for tenants' personal property contained entirely within the premises, storage is not permitted on the premises. So normally the leases I've been involved in lately, I'm checking B, okay? So it's either A or B. Please don't leave these blank, because those could be squabbles later, and we could just avoid it by having it filled out and letting the landlord review it. So the utilities, tenant agrees to pay for all utilities and services and the following charges. Maybe in a small unit, maybe a fourplex, maybe the landlord wants the tenant to pay for their own trash. So it could be, and the following. So make sure if there's nothing supposed to be there, then you leave it blank. And tenant agrees to pay for all utilities and the following charges, if they're adding something here, except, water maybe, which shall be paid for by the landlord. So except, and then you put whatever that the landlord is paying for. Generally here, it's going to be water and trash, but in some smaller units, I actually have seen where the landlord is having the tenants pay for their own trash. Okay, so one of the important things is if the water is on a sub-meter, make sure that you're checking the box. And there's sub-metering companies that come out and read it, and then it'll populate with this CAR form, water sub-meter addendum. It just gives the tenant some information about who's reading that. Okay, and right here, landlord is only responsible for installing and maintaining one usable telephone jack. So we don't have to supply one in each bedroom and the living room and the kitchen, okay? So if the utilities are separate, the tenant needs to place those utilities in their name as of the commencement date. And look at A, B, and C. If there's not a separate gas meter, you need to have that checked. If the premises does not have a separate electrical meter, check the box. So make sure you're reading these and checking them. And then the landlord will be verifying all this. Just make sure wherever you've checked box or filled any blanks in, please make sure when they're reviewing it, you have everything highlighted so they don't miss any checked boxes while they're reviewing. It's just a good help for them. So the condition of the premises, the tenant has examined the premises and all of the furnishings, etc. So here at Coldwell Banker, we require, and it's good for the landlord, it's good for the tenant, a move-in, move-out form. So move-in, move-out forms are extensive, as an extensive document that has about 4 or 5 pages, and you're documenting anything that you notice that's wrong in the unit. Maybe there's a hole in a door or something like that, but at any rate, it'll prompt you on the form, and it'll give you other lines if you notice something else wrong. So if you can, agents, get this completed, tenant acknowledgement of condition of these items is contained in the attached statement, CAR form MIMO. If you can, try to get that done before lease commencement. If it's a vacant unit, that's easy to do. If not, sometimes it can be hard to obtain that form. But if you can't get it done because it's not a vacant unit, then you're going to be coming down to see that the landlord will deliver to tenant a statement of condition of the MIMO, and they may be doing it within 3 days execution of the agreement or prior to commencement date, or within 3 days of commencement date. That's up to the landlord to let you know. And the tenant, right here it says, needs to complete that MIMO to the landlord within 3 days. Unless you amend it, tenant's failure to return this MIMO within the time shall conclusively be deemed that the tenant's acknowledgement of the condition of the property as stated in the MIMO. So if the landlord provides them a blank MIMO and doesn't note anything that's wrong, then if the tenant does not move out and get this form back to the landlord, then it's assumed that was correct. So explain that to your clients that this is for their good too, that they fill out the MIMO documentation form. And like I said, help your people out. If there's a way it's a vacant unit and you can give them the form, and with the landlord's concurrence, they can fill this out ahead of time, that would be great. If not, check C. Or there's also D, and I've seen this done too. The tenant provides landlord with a list of items that are damaged or not within operational condition within 3 days after commencement date, not as a contingency, but as an acknowledgement of the condition of the premises. So it's very important to document this. And that is, again, between the tenant and the landlord, but make sure you're providing those forms and explaining it to your clients as much as you can, okay? Maintenance and use of reporting. The tenant shall use the property, operate and safeguard the premises. anything in the property, including furnishings, mechanical, electrical. If the tenant notices something is not working, please let the landlord know so that the landlord can take a look at it and get it repaired. Okay, so the tenant needs to let the landlord know if there's any inoperable items. And the tenant right here shall be charged for all damages to the premises as a result of failure to report a problem. So let's say the tenant was noticing that the toilet was leaking on the floor in the bathroom or something of that nature, the kitchen sink was leaking, and they never reported it and it just kept getting worse and worse. Then this is could be an item that the tenant could be charged for because they didn't report it. So make sure that the tenant understands and the landlord should let them know that they should report those items, okay? And there's disclosures we'll go through in the next class. So on B and C, landlord or tenant, you're going to be checking a box, shall water the garden, landscaping, trees and shrubs, except normally this is going to be the landlord. They're going to water the garden, but sometimes even on lower level units, there's patios on the first floor that have planters, and the gardener can't get into those locked patios that butt up against the tenant's unit. So if that's the case, maybe you want to, the landlord wants to put except plants in tenant's private patio planter or something like that. So landlord or tenant shall maintain the garden, landscaping, trees and shrubs. Generally, that's going to be the landlord maintaining the gardening and landscaping. But again, maybe there's a private patio that they can't get to. So maybe they want the tenant to maintain that. Now, remember, if somebody's, and I've had this happen, so I want to bring it up because it's something we may not think about. If somebody's on a second story of a complex and they have a patio, I have seen where they stack that patio with so many plants and they're watering and it's flowing down to the next balcony and it's just making a mess along the side of the building. So if you know, helping your landlord, just say, do you allow plants up there on the patio? Because I have seen it and it caused some damage going down the side of the building and then it was hitting the person below's patio. So if you notice those kind of setups, be mentioning to the landlord, maybe they'll have something about that in their rules and regulations. Okay, because if we can be the eyes a little bit and show how we know what we're doing and our worth, then I think that helps. And, you know, we're here to assist the landlord through the leasing process and then they take over. So landlord and tenant, you know, because there's water shortage, agree to state or local water use restrictions. So if the tenant fails to maintain any item that the tenant is responsible for, that shall give the landlord the right to hire someone to perform that maintenance and charge the tenant to cover that cost. So the following items, and this is, I feel really important, of personal property are included in the premises without warranty, and the landlord will not maintain, repair, or replace them. So here, if the landlord has provided the stove and refrigerator, I'd certainly be putting that in. I have seen cases where, you know, they want a new refrigerator. So make sure that if they have allowed them to use their in-unit refrigerator or something like that, the stove they would probably have to replace or fix if it's not working, but the refrigerator, make sure you're putting these items in, and you can even put the stove. So make sure that you're covering that here. Be asking the landlord, maybe there's a built-in microwave or dishwasher. Make sure that you're covering whatever the landlord wants to put in that item. Okay, and the tenant understands if the premises is located in a common interest development, the landlord may not have the authority or control over certain parts of the premises, such as the roof, electrical, gas, things of that nature. Those are usually handled by an HOA. And right here, tenant shall not use the premises to plant, grow, or cultivate or sell marijuana. So we don't want that in there, and it's stipulated in the lease. The tenant is advised to satisfy themselves with the neighborhood conditions, including schools, proximity, and adequacy of law enforcement, etc. So that prior to signing the lease, the tenant can go ahead and check the neighborhood conditions unless otherwise provided for. In the civil code, no animal or pet shall be kept on or about the premises without landlord's prior written consent, except as agreed in the pet addendum. So if they're agreeing to it, you can check this box and provide that pet addendum. The tenant is responsible for all damage caused by smoking in the unit, included but not limited to stains, burns, odors, etc. No smoking of any substance is allowed on the premises or common area. If smoking does occur on the premises, the tenant is in material breach of this agreement. Okay, so this is pretty important because a lot of people don't realize, like, even if they're standing on their own patio, if it's no smoking, it's no smoking, unless there's a check here that says smoking of, oh, okay, smoking of the following substance only is allowed. There's a check here and they've put something here, but most landlords, from what I've seen, are going to leave it to the fallout here. They're not going to be checking anything that's allowed to be smoked. So rules and regulations. The tenant agrees to comply with the landlord rules and regulation. So if there's posted rules and regulations, that means those that are posted on the premises, or they could be delivered to the tenant. So a lot of times you'll see the landlords will post up some rules and regulations on the premises. So the tenant would need to comply to that, and their guests and invitees to the premises. So if applicable, only if applicable, check one of these boxes. So either the landlord will provide the tenant with a copy of rules and regulations within X amount of days, or the tenant has been provided with and acknowledges receipt of copy of rules and regulations. So I think it's a good thing if they have typed up rules and regulations and they're already hanging about the property, maybe a typed up one should be delivered to the tenant upon, when they're executing the list, because those rules and regulations are already posted. So it might be a good idea to give them also a hard copy if that is the case. So if they are in a condominium or planned unit development, you need to check the box here because there is an HOA and the tenant does agree, once you check this box, to comply with the HOA conditions and restrictions, bylaws and rules, etc. So if the landlord, you can check 1 and C, landlord shall provide the tenant with a copy of the HOA rules within X amount of days, or 2, the tenant has been provided for and acknowledges receipt. I think this is important. So if you're leasing a unit in an HOA, try to see if they have the the HOA rules so that you can comply, you can give that to the tenant so they're aware. Okay. So you have to have permission to make any alterations to the unit, and the landlord is not responsible for the cost of alterations or repairs made by the tenant. And the tenant is not allowed to deduct from the rent any costs or repairs, alterations, or improvement. And if you do that as a tenant, that's considered unpaid rent. So keys and locks, this is pretty important. So I usually check that they're going to be given it, or on the date of commencement. I don't give them to them early. Okay, so that's up to the landlord though, but I usually check this box and put the commencement date. Check all that'll apply here, whatever keys, remotes you're giving them, and make sure you put the number. This could be 2 keys, 1 key, whatever it is, make sure you're putting the number here. And very important on B, make sure that you are checking one of the boxes. Very, very important. Tenant acknowledges that the locks to the premises have or have not been rekeyed. Make sure you're checking one of these boxes. Let the landlord confirm that. Ask the landlord. Again, we are just drafting this agreement for them. They will be confirming anything on here. You're going to highlight it for them. So any check or items that you've written in, the landlord can review it. But make sure you filled this out, okay? That's really important. The tenant needs to know, has that unit been rekeyed or not? So if the tenant decides to rekey existing locks or opening devices, the tenant needs to immediately deliver copies of all keys to the landlord, and the tenant will pay all costs and charges related to loss of any keys or opening devices. So tenant may not remove locks even if installed by the tenant. So if they have done some installation of locks, they can't remove them, okay? And they do need to give the landlord all sets of keys. So if the landlord needs to go into the premises for the purposes to make any agreed to repairs, like installation of smokes or anything, or maintaining smoke detectors or carbon monoxide, anything like that, alterations or improvements, the tenant agrees that the landlord broker may also take pictures of the premises. Now remember, a 24-hour written notice, as it's stipulated right here, shall be reasonable and sufficient notice that the landlord is coming in, except as follows. 48-hour written notice is required to conduct an inspection of the premises prior to the tenant moving out, unless the tenant waives the right. If the landlord has in writing informed the tenant that the premise is for sale and that the tenant will be notified orally to show the premises, then you need to have a car form NSC on file. The landlord does. Then for the next 120 days following that delivery of that notice, the tenant may be given oral dates that the landlord will need to enter, or prospective purchasers. Okay, so here, if check tenant authorizes the use of a key or key safe or lockbox, normally you're not going to check that. I don't think I've ever checked that in all my years, and most tenants may not be comfortable with that. So here, photographs and internet advertising, it's much the same as what we went over with the residential purchase agreement, that we as agents or landlords cannot control what's out on the MLS. What we put on the MLS, we control, excuse me, but many platforms on the internet do grab those images and use them. So that's just advising the tenant of that. The tenant does authorize the landlord to place a for sale for lease sign on the premises. Assignment and subletting. The tenant may not sublet any part of the premises, parking, or even storage spaces, or assign or transfer this agreement to any interest without the landlord's prior written consent. This will even apply to short-term vacation and transient rentals unless you check this box. Normally, I think the landlords are not going to be checking that box. Again, that is a discussion to have with the landlord. Any violation of this prohibition is non-curable material breach of this agreement. So I am going to stop at number 23. I am watching my time. We will pick up with 23 next week. It should go a little bit faster. We're almost done. I am going to stop so we are on time, and let me look at the chat box. Oh, Christine is saying, and anybody that has questions can just chime in. Yeah, it is very expensive for condos on the keys to the mailbox. So make sure that those keys are working. Make sure the tenant is aware to make sure those are working immediately. If you're working for the landlord, make sure that they've checked that those keys work to the common areas and the mailbox. You're right, Christine, it's really expensive and sometimes time consuming to even try to get them. Okay,
Michelle?
yeah.
Jeffrey,
Uh-huh.
Jeffrey, just quick questions on smoking. Is that prohibition of smoking only to the marijuana, or prohibited
No.
or no smoking for cigarettes?
No smoking. Peter, do
smoking.
you have anything to add?
No smoking, including cigarettes.
Yeah.
Depends on the city. Pasadena.
Pasadena has a very strict no smoking policy. Even if the landlord would allow you to smoke, Pasadena will not. So there's certain cities, Jeffrey, but this particular agreement says no smoking, so that anything you smoke. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Michelle, I'm sorry, I had asked a question. Who is really responsible to complete the LR? Is it the listing agent or the selling agent? Who really is responsible?
Listing agent.
Okay.
Yeah.
Michelle.
Mm-hmm.
Hi, this is Sylvia.
Hi, Sylvia.
Hi, just a quick note on the MIMO. In the past and up until just recent, what I did with my tenants, I didn't give them that form to complete themselves, but I treated almost like the verification of property conditions,
Yes.
kind of like walk through with them all the way through, you know?
Yeah,
and get
that's, yeah, that is a good tie back to the residential purchase agreement. Yeah, you're right. It's like a VP, but it's very extensive, right? And sometimes the tenants want to take pictures, and I encourage that. So, yeah, Christine.
Yeah, because I always tell them,
Yeah.
whatever condition you see now is the way we want to make a note. If anything is damaged, you want to make a note of that now, because in the end, when you move out, if you didn't make that note, then it's on you.
Yeah, so, it's not if an appliance broke down after they moved in, but it's what you see at the time.
Correct.
Thank you. And then, yeah, Christine Finn says, and this is true, you're not allowed to smoke in Pasadena, indoor or outdoor, even if you own the property. Yes, that's true. They are very strict. Anybody else have any questions or comments?
I have one last comment, Jeffrey.
Okay.
So a lot of still a lot of people in the population still smoke. So if you're a renter, you're looking for a place and you're smoking, how can you get a property if they're not allowed to smoke inside?
How
In the
can you
balcony,
what?
balcony.
Oh, you can't smoke because if it's a no smoking contract, it's a no smoking contract. Because if that, if you're smoking on or about the unit, okay, number one, you may be putting smoke smell onto walls and drapes and stuff like that, or carpet. Secondly, you might be disturbing people.
Yeah, that's right. Even if you're smoking in the balcony, the smoke can travel to some other places, like into other units. Jeffrey?
Yeah,
I agree with that. I agree with that.
yeah, I
because-
agree with you. Yeah, I agree with that. But I'm just thinking about, how can those people be able to, if they're renting and they're smoking, so probably they just smoke outside then.
No,
I got you.
If they
But even
if
smoking
you are
outside,
smoking,
like I live in a townhouse condo situation, and I have a renters within the same complex, right? A renter to my right and a renter to my left, and they're both smokers. So, and I'm not a smoker, and I can smell their cigarette on their
Correct.
upstairs level, and that's really annoying. And that's secondhand smoking. What's that going to do to me? And I asked them, kindly, because they go outside and smoke on their patio or outside their garage. And I asked him, could you please smoke away from here? He says, I pay rent, I'm allowed to. And that's, what else can I do? I wish they can go away,
I know.
I keep on saying, oh, please, I hope they move soon. But, I wish we had that same rule as Pasadena.
I
Because
know.
I'm not a smoker, and what's that gonna do to me? They don't care about my health,
You can report to the HOA, Brian's saying.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
The HOA, well, it depends on who your HOA is, if they hear you, great. If they don't, you're out of luck too.
Does anybody have any other questions?
Michelle, I do have a comment.
Uh-huh.
When you're renting the residential leases to people, you really have to be careful about marijuana growth. You have to specifically tell the tenants that that's totally forbidden in
Yeah,
any residential zones. Because in our office lately, we have an incident where the agent rented the places to tenants who grow marijuana, and then it was later on busted by the law enforcement, and then they get lawsuits and they get the reprimand from the DRE, and one agent actually gets suspended from the real estate practice because of that. So you have to be very careful, and also on the lease. Before you consummate the lease, and you should check the box that the premises will be managed by either a management company or by the landlord himself. And you have to check the box, either one, okay? But don't forget to check the box. Otherwise, they will say that you being an agent participated in the property management, and when there's a losses or when there's complaint about the place, you'll be getting involved. So you don't want that at all.
I have a
Okay, that's my
question
comment.
then, Peter, does our property management form assist in that, what you're talking about? Because we're saying we're not the property manager.
Yes, yes, it does
As
too,
long
yeah.
as we get that signed, we should be good and fill out the
That's
lease
true, it should
properly.
be good, but it's a good practice to check the
Right,
box. Make sure that the landlord understand that you are not the property the manager for her or for him, and also that the tenants understand as well.
okay, okay,
Mhm.
that's great. Let me see what's in the chat box.
Hi, Michelle and then Peter. I have a question.
Mhm. ahead.
How do I get in the property to check them? They do have a smoke or not?
48-hour notice.
Well, the landlord can inspect their own properties, so they can, provide a notice and, go in and inspect their own properties. Is that what you're asking?
Then okay, I'm a agent. Then can I go with the owner, the landlord? Then come with the tenant's property. Then to check the to see if they do smoke or do like a marijuana smoking or something.
24 hours.
I'll let Peter answer that. I probably would not. I would let the landlord handle the landlord's business.
Yeah, well, if you're suspecting it and you have reasonable evidence of it, then you can go to the tenant and say, hey, you're in breach of your lease, and then you demand them to from smoking or do anything that is or that is in breach of the lease. Yeah, you have the right to do that, and
Okay.
then you also have the right to enter into premises by giving the notice to the tenant.
Okay.
Reasonable time for the tenants, so yeah, you have the right to do that.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. Good to know. Thanks.
Is
Michelle, I
that as
just-
the agent or the landlord, Peter?
What's that?
As the landlord, correct? Not the
Yeah,
agent.
it's the landlord, not as the
Yeah,
agent.
it's not
No.
the agent, Joseph,
not
it's
the
the
agent.
Oh,
landlord.
okay. Okay.
You have to
Okay.
have the landlord has the right, the agent doesn't. After the lease is completed, the agent should be out of the picture.
Okay. Okay.
Tell them
Got you.
what
Thanks.
level it is as a leasing agent. Just
Michelle?
In terms of, we're done.
Yes,
I just want to remind everybody that there is a lot of disclosures that are still applicable when you do a lease. And
Yes.
so we are in the process of updating the checklist for this. So hopefully by next week, and we'll get Ruben to get you guys copies. The same way we did it on the sales, we'll do it on the listing side. So those are the ones that I'm working right now. But yes, just because the I would say the listing agent doesn't provide you documents, doesn't mean they're not due. You have to
correct.
go after them, or you got to prepare them and send it to them. And you need all the required documents. In case you're ever audited, you want to make sure that you don't get violations or you don't have to pay any out fees because you don't have all the proper documentation.
Yeah, good point, Anna. And next week we'll finish up the contract, and then we do have all of the disclosures pulled in already in the training. So I'll get with you and see if there's any additions or subtractions to that data prior to next Friday.
Okay, sounds good.
Yeah.
And
perfect.
Michelle,
Yes.
Jeffrey, I have a suggestion. If we have any further questions, can we email you, send you
Of course.
this question? I know
And-
you run out of time. Can you
and
give
yeah.
your email?
Yeah, I'll put my email in, and also you can, if I don't answer right away to anybody, pardon me, sometimes I'm in meetings or I'm out. But you can always text me so I know your question, and then at least if I get a chance, I can quickly text back. But I always try, if you're looking for me, I will do my very best to get back to you the same day. But sometimes if I'm out or I'm in meetings, I'm tied up, but it's not because I don't want to answer you right away. So feel free to text me. Okay.
Thank you. Great. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Any other questions? And we'll be continuing next week. Thank you so much,
That's good.
everybody.
Good presentation today, Michelle. Very
Oh,
good.
thank you.
All
Okay,
right. See you
Thank you,
guys.
Michelle. Have a nice weekend. Good class.
Thank you.
thank you
Thank
all
you,
for your
Michelle.
attendance.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.